Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the people here at Sawmill Road who braved the chilly temperatures tonight, and also everyone who's joining us by Zoom. I'm Susan Webster from the Fishing Creek Watershed Association, and we're very pleased tonight to welcome John Zaktansky as our speaker. He's the director and of the middle, he is the Middle Susquehanna Riverkeeper. His association, the Middle Susquehanna Riverkeeper Association, is an organization that promotes the health and the vibrancy of a huge area of the Susquehanna River Basin, 11,000 square miles, I believe it says. And John is also a writer who has written many blog posts and investigative articles. And he has put together a number of these writings into a book, which he has here tonight. We're very pleased to have him speaking tonight on aquatic creatures of our area. Please welcome John Zaktansky.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys having me out. It's nice to be in person versus on Zoom. Zoom is great. I'm thankful for the opportunities it provides, but it's also nice to be in person. I took over as Riverkeeper in February of 2020, which was weeks before the pandemic shut everything down. So it was a steep learning curve of trying to meet people in a unique way, and so it's just nice to be around and talk with people about people with like minds who are excited about our water resources. So go through there. It's okay. It's operator error. It's nothing else. So. All right, manually once. Good. Okay, so as Sue shared, we cover an 11,000 square mile. Let's see if the laser pointer works. This is fun. I don't get laser pointers very often. My kids take them and lose them. So, but we cover an 11,000 square mile watershed. So basically everything that feeds into the north and the west branch of the Susquehanna, and a tiny portion of the main stem down to where the Penns Creek goes into the Susquehanna River. And obviously it's a large area, and it's I'm a one-person association. So to be able to cover that area, we need to be creative in what we do, and to slowly build purposely a group of stewards throughout the watershed that can help feed us information, and we can feed information through. So again, it's a wide area, but we try to do the best we can with the resources we have. Education is a large part of that, and I know many of you who are here that I know are also big advocates in educating others about our aquatic resources. As was mentioned, I actually used to work at a newspaper prior to this. I worked at this Williamsport Sun-Gazette for a couple of years while I was in college, writing movie reviews originally, just because I wanted during college a free movie pass to go watch movies as much as I wanted to. And so that was great. And then doing sports, and then slowly working my way into sports editor position at the Milton Standard. I took some time away for a little bit and did some counseling at an adolescent group home for about 10 years, working with troubled teenagers. And I then got back into newspapering at the Daily Item for 14 years, and wrote a bunch of stuff. I love writing. It's always just something I've enjoyed doing. And I love the outdoors, and this position allows me to marry both of those. So with education and with a pandemic going on, we decided to do an interactive blog feed, and we've written literally hundreds, at least more than 200 blog posts since February of 2020 on a wide variety of topics, everything from invasive species and hellbenders and other native species, and microplastics. We shared a study from Susquehanna University about microplastics and smallmouth bass stomachs a while ago, all the way to more recently, I just put out a two-part package on fracking under the river and found that DCNR and the state specifically allows fracking directly under our river and some of the tributaries to pull gas resources from there. So talking about that and what I found with some of the leases dating back for 10 years or so. So we just try to raise awareness and say, this is what's going on, try to get it to as many people as possible. And we do that through our blog and through podcast series. I've actually interviewed more than 50 people, close to 60 now. We have try to get weekly, sometimes every other week. The holidays made it a little bit more difficult to stay on schedule with that, but it's interesting because you get to hear the passion of the people who care about our resources. And we've had a wide variety of musicians who've written songs about our aquatic resources. We have aquatic biologists, we have teachers, we have a veterinarian who there's a wide gamut of people that are in our podcast conversations, and a lot of those then translate into stories we put on our blog and share on social media. And with those two expand our focus, contacts, and to make connections that have helped us make a difference. Along with education, you'll see that we had to do hands-on programming for kids and families. That's something that this past year. We did 7 of them. We had Dr. Patokis with Hellbender and doing some amphibian and reptile work. We had someone with live snakes on the boat, which made the Hiawatha staff really excited for me. Like they were, yeah, well, some of them weren't too thrilled, but it worked out really well. And the kids were excited, and we got to go through some really cool stuff and able to tie it all back into the environmental aspect of what they should be doing at home to make a difference. We also started this past year, our first Heron programs. They're called Helping Engage Our Rivers Youth with Nature. It's HERYN. And that's getting kids out. We did 6-day programs all back to back to back because of the way the grant came. We had to force them into one week. And we had 73 kids total. So we tried about 12 a day, going through alternating every hour between fishing instruction, kayak instruction, and kind of going back and forth. So by the end of the day, they were doing competitions on the lake on one side, they were catching fish on the other. I think the kids caught 780 some odd fish, all panfish, but a couple bass, but they were pretty excited about that. So, and it really, as a lot of the kids, was the first time ever touching a fishing pole or being in a kayak, and it showed. But by the end of the day, they showed confidence, and our goal was to get them to go home and be excited enough to teach their parents about this and get them out purchasing kayaks and fishing gear and then getting on the waterways and caring about the resources. So we do a Songs of the Susquehanna project where we collect songs. We're doing that right now through the end of the month and putting together, again, an opportunity for us to interact with people in a unique, different way. It's COVID safe in that it's all online, and we're able to share the songs out and promote our musicians who are amazing. We have an extremely awesome, throughout this entire watershed that I had up earlier, set of musicians who care about our waterway resources. So, and then within that, their contacts and their greater influence with other people that we never would have contact to before. It allows to open up those doors. And ultimately, our goal is to engage people, educate them with information from experts. I'm not an expert at all. I talk with experts, and I'll admit that most people know a lot more than I do. I just try to share what they have, and then along the way, we all learn something together. And then empowering people in the water, in their home areas to go out and do something about what they've learned about. So, and then as was mentioned, we just in November put together this book with stories that we had. We had so many stories, and we had a lot of people when I would go to events for some of the in-person ones we were able to do that didn't even realize we had a website. A lot of people in our area still don't have access to internet, a reliable internet. So we wanted something in hand that people could purchase and take these stories home with them and to learn about it. So we're excited about that. It helps, some of the money obviously goes back to help our association once we cover costs, but the main goal is to get more people aware of some of these issues. And it's been a cool, over the past 2 months or so, cool way to do that. So in the book, and for those who have them, you'll get a chance to see this if you haven't already, but there's 23 chapters and 52 some odd stories, 52 stories, a number of photos and infographics and stuff like that. One of the chapters is devoted to invasive species. And Now, that chapter doesn't cover every invasive species known to mankind. It covers the stories that we did this past year and a half that dealt with invasive species. So the rusty crayfish is one. And I'll talk about the rusty here for a minute. We also talked about snakehead fish and the threat that they pose to our watershed. Thankfully, they're not here yet, but I don't think it's just probably more so just a matter of time, the way things sound. And then to talk some about the Hellbender and a cool thing I got to go do with some people with that. So, so rusty crayfish, beautiful guy up here. They get to be pretty big, not this big, thankfully, because that would be scary if we had a crayfish that large in our waterways. But they can be quite large. And the designation, for those who don't know, when you talk about rusty crayfish, the rust is mainly talking about this rusty spot on the side. Most rusty crayfish, that's their calling card. It's almost like you dipped your fingers in rust paint and then kind of pick them up there. There's also at the tips of the claws, for these guys, you'll typically find like a yellowish orange tip with like a black band behind it. It's not always the case, but typically you'll see that with them. And one of the first stories I did, in fact, the first podcast interview I did back in August of 2020 was with Dr. David Lieb. He's with Fish and Boat Commission and the Western PA Conservancy. And he does a lot of work with macroinvertebrates. And you know, he spoke with me about this invasive invasion, is what he called it, in our waterways, and where invasive crayfish species come in and wipe out native species over the course of time. And for most people who don't care about waterway stuff or just vaguely do, that may not sound like a big deal, but we'll talk about what it can mean. As far as crayfish details, and I'm sure for most of this, I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak. I know you guys all have quite a lot of experience in dealing with our aquatic resources, but crayfish have a hard ecoskeleton. They shed or molt, and they're soft until those times, and it becomes vulnerable to predators. There's some adaptations that are kind of cool, where they can breathe through their gills. Their eyes are movable stalks, allows them to see in different directions. Sometimes that would be great for me to have with my kids, to find where my laser pointers are. I wish I could see more with that. But they have chemical cues to identify different things, and just some other cool things about crayfish themselves. The rusty crayfish is an invasive species in the Susquehanna watershed. Invasive, obviously, meaning that it didn't originally, it wasn't here, it wasn't native, it wasn't part of our watershed. It somehow got introduced to our watershed, greater watershed, and it's taken off and taken over through most of it. Now, there are areas such as Fishing Creek, and via some emails back and forth, thanks to Sue with Sean Hartzell, Fishing Creek is still somewhat immune to the rusty crayfish takeover, partially because of the dam near the mouth. At least that's the theory. But overall, if you go to most places, I live on the Pence Creek, like right on the banks. My kids and I are in there daily. In fact, that's probably where my laser pointers are. But digging under rocks and everything else where we look, everything I find is a rusty crayfish. And in talking with David Lieb, he said basically the same thing. Throughout a large part of our watershed, the Susquehanna River itself, 9 times out of 10, if you find a crayfish, it's going to be the rusty crayfish. Why is that? Well, how did they take over so quickly, and why are they wiping out these native species? Well, the main reason is because of their size. Again, not because they're as big as that last slide, but they can get up to around 6 inches or so, which pretty big for a crayfish. And they're super aggressive. David Lieb was talking to me about how he'd go out and do studies, and he would actually watch underwater one time specifically of a rusty coming up into a native and slicing its head off with its claw. Like, it just came right in there and just duked it out. In fact, I have a super short video that kind of shows their interactions in fighting here in a moment, but they're extremely aggressive. And so pretty quickly, when they get in a waterway, they'll find the crevices under rocks that the crayfish enjoy. They'll find the natives, they'll push them out, either kill them on the spot or they'll push them out for something else to eat, and they'll take over that rock structure. And before long, they populate, and they take over a lot quicker than what we than what we'd like to admit. And then I have a quote from David Lieb from the story. Unfortunately, the native species are getting eradicated either through losing battles with exotic species or when displaced from their safe spots become food for various types of fish. I know in what Sean Hartzell had sent to us, he had said about Allegheny crayfish being one of the primary species he's found in Fishing Creek. The Allegheny is also an invasive. It's not as big as the Rusty, and from everything I've read and everyone I've talked to, the Rusty usually, if there's a Rusty and an Allegheny in a creek, the Rusty eventually takes over. It's kind of like this hierarchy of crayfish, so to speak. But the Allegheny is not native either. It's an invasive as well. But typically, we'll talk in a minute about how those get here. I have a video I found, again, talking about the violence of these guys. And I'm not sure how well it'll be seen, but so. Here's some music that just for. You can see these guys wrestling around. Now these are two Rusties, so they're two bigger size. You can imagine if one was a smaller one, it wouldn't take too much for the other guy to take them over. They can get pretty violent. Of course, the music, if you can hear it, just adds to it. I'm sure music plays like that underwater when crayfish fight. We've eaten them. Yeah, we've eaten them. We've collected Rusties and we've eaten them. And I mean, you get more meat off a Rusty than you do the natives. So, I mean, there's that part of it that's nice. But it's, for those who haven't tried them, you boil them just like lobsters and they look like little red lobsters and you can get meat off them from the tail and the claw. You're not getting much meat, but it's still interesting. All right, so why are Rusty crayfish an issue? We talked already about how the exotic species are larger, eat more, and grow quickly. They wipe out the other areas. The issue then is that our aquatic ecosystem, the fish and everything else that's set up in the hierarchy of things, are used to the native smaller crayfish. So the smaller fish that were relied on, the smaller original native crayfish, are obviously impacted as the crayfish get bigger and more aggressive. It makes it harder for them to consume that. So a quote from David Lieb, exotic species grow too big too fast for many of the smaller fish to consume. So sunfish, rock bass, and brook trout are being negatively affected. In some areas, we've seen a large reduction in fish biomass because of this. One of those reasons because crayfish are great in transferring lower level energy, from lower levels up through into the fish that eat them. So if a bass has to go around and eat every tiny little macro insect that it would need, it would take forever and it just wouldn't survive. It relies on being able to eat those crayfish that transfer the energy from smaller portions. So that's one of the main impacts that they have, is that it changes the fish and the type of fish that you'll find in that waterway. And in fact, David Lieb said he had done a study somewhere out west where he had an enclosed lake type situation where rusty crayfish were introduced. They took over, and the amount of panfish, like the numbers dropped drastically. But of course, then that has a cycle effect on the rest of the ecosystem. So now, obviously, the ecosystem can adapt and new ways come through, but it definitely causes an impact overall. So, and I mentioned about how that happens. Sometimes it's careless introduction. Sometimes it's intentional for some species. Some people, I don't know if they intentionally want rusty crayfish in their back waterway just because they think it's cool and they're big and they can eat them. Snakeheads, we'll talk in a minute. That's more of an issue potentially there with that. But a lot of times it's unintentional. People just don't think about it. They get crayfish, they buy them online or whatever. There's a lot of laws now in place because of this situation. You can't transport crayfish from one area to another. If you catch a crayfish, you can catch them using a regular fishing license, but you have to cut their head off before you can remove them from the waterway. There's a number of other rules that help reduce the chance of this happening and spreading into other waterways. So anyway, that's the quick overview on the rusty. I believe that's all I have on that. Was there any questions about crayfish in general? And again, I'm not an expert. I'm just relaying everything I've learned from others. Well, I mean, again, bass, certain bass will, and in fact, obviously that's why a lot of people use crayfish to go out fishing for bass and larger fish species. Talk about muskies and higher predator fish. And again, I mean, obviously, with the smaller crayfish, you're looking at trout, panfish, smaller. I have a little crayfish lure that I use for panfish, and it's just a small size one. I catch tons of panfish on that. Again, it depends on the fish you have, but they definitely are great food just because they transfer that energy from lower levels up to the higher levels. So Yeah, catfish lure. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll move on then. Snakeheads, invasive situation that is threatening our area, but it's not here yet. It's not like you go out and find snakeheads under every rock like you can rusty crayfish. This was a story that I was just fascinated with. You hear about snakehead fish being caught in different areas of our state. The Delaware River has snakeheads pretty much all the way through, from what I read, up through the northern portions of the Delaware River. And you see these fish get to be quite large and pretty ferocious. In fact, I think on the next screen, yeah, there's its mouth with its set of teeth as it grabs a hold of something, shreds it up, obviously. Hopefully not someone's hand, but some kind of a fish or something. World record, supposedly in the Potomac, it's a 20-pound snakehead, as far as the size they can be, up to 3 feet long, and an arsenal of teeth. As you can see in the photo, it's something gets in there, it's not going to come out very easily. And more about the snakehead. Their niche overlaps largemouth and smallmouth. So again, snakeheads have not been reported in our waterway yet. In the Susquehanna, and talking with Sean Hartzell, was the main source for this article. He had said that nothing above the dam structures down to the southern end of the state have made it up through. A couple have. I think about a dozen or so did get through some of the ladders there, but they've been able to locate those supposedly, but it doesn't mean a couple aren't out there breeding and moving up through. This is an issue that currently is kind of in the southeast PA area, Philadelphia, again, Delaware Basin, but they find them in lakes, they find them in other places, and obviously they don't just magically appear there on their own. Snakeheads are, for a lot of anglers, a really good sport fish. Down in Maryland, they have tons of tournaments and stuff like that for snakeheads. So there are some anglers that be like, oh, it'd be great if we had them in our backyard. And so more so than the rusty crayfish, some of the transporting of snakeheads could happen, and at least has been assumed it happened through people intentionally moving them into waterways. So with the snakehead, unlike the rusty crayfish, there's no real check and balance system. So they are an apex predator. There's not a whole lot that eats, at least within the water, that eats a snakehead that's going to go after and take them out. Now, obviously, you look at eagles and ospreys and stuff like that, we'll put an impact into them and stuff. But for the most part, they come in and there's not a lot that's going to stop them from taking over in a waterway and taking over quite quickly. And again, they overlap largemouth and smallmouth bass. So they become competitors, and not many largemouth bass are going to compete with something that big when it comes to certain species and food. So it definitely impacts a lot of the species that we have in our region on a wide scale. In fact, Sean Hartzell mentioned about a survey in Maryland showed that snakeheads negatively impacted every fish species within a waterway except for carp and suckerfish. So every other fish species, every level of fish, from darters and minnows all the way up through, including the larger fish, muskies and stuff like that, all were impacted at some point or another in some way by the presence of snakeheads in the waterway. So, and then before we get to the chart on the left, another comment from Sean, another issue with the snakehead is that they are natural transfers of a virus that causes issues in largemouth bass. In the 2010s, there was a virus going through. It caused bass to become lethargic, created sores, and was a pretty big detriment to the bass population. Snakeheads are known carriers for this virus. Their impact then could be a double whammy. They affect the competition with the waterway, but also can bring disease with them. And snakeheads are very unique looking, but there are several other species, native species here in Pennsylvania that that can look similar to them, and you'll see them on the screen. There's a bowfin and the burbot, and you can see when you look at certain things like the anal fin on the snakehead is much different than that on the bowfin. The head is, the face structure is a lot different than what you see on a bowfin. The burbot has these pelvic fins real up close up to the front. The pelvic fins are a lot further back on the snakehead, and you can see other other differences on this chart as well. It's the Fish and Boat Commission's chart, so you can check it out on their website for more details as well. And they have, in fact, on our website, if you look, we have a long list of different things and comments from Sean about how you can tell apart a snakehead from a bowfin and a burbot, and what that looks like. Another video, I don't know if I can, should work the same way, or if not, that's fine. Okay. Oh, yeah, it is. Perfect. Before we get into this, another thing that Sean said about snakeheads that's kind of fascinating to him is that there are rumors that snakeheads can traverse on land for periods of time, that they aren't other fish that flip and flop back in the water as quick as they can, that they've actually can go across land, and he admits that that is the case. So a comment up here, and it's pretty small, and I'm blocking it, which isn't very nice of me. Unlike other fish species that are snakes, snakeheads can breathe out of water while swimming. They are known to come up for air and can survive out of water for a couple of hours if they remain moist. We have heard reports of them crawling along land using their fins, although they likely aren't going very far. I did find this video. It's another real short one of, and this is in Thailand, I believe, of a different strain of snakeheads, but it kind of shows how they move on land. And it's definitely different than if you catch a bass or a panfish flopping on the ground and just hoping it falls in by chance.
Record this.
Yeah. So if you have two streams side by side with some kind of a land structure in between, technically these guys could move across that structure, which would obviously increase the odds of them. There's an intentionality on how it's moving around, kind of like a snake. It's interesting how they can move. So Asia, I believe, from what I understand, I think they're from Asia, but yeah, a lot of things come from Asia. And I'm not sure beyond that. We're southern United States, they've been around a lot longer, so maybe they're native there. I really don't know that one for sure. One of the reasons that this story kind of came to fruition was we had a contest for kids, and it's one of the things we try to do, where I think it was Earth Day last year. We're trying to engage kids throughout our watershed. So online, we're like, hey, have your kid make up a poster of something they can do or something they'd like to see that would help our waterways. So we had this 8-year-old kid from Selinsgrove. His name's Liam Crane. You can see him there piloting a boat. He drew out of the blue this picture of a snakehead eating a bunch of fish, not looking pretty mean there. And it's pretty accurate, actually. If you look at the chart, he's pretty good. He told me that he saw him on River Monsters television, and he just had this strong hate for snakeheads, and he shared quotes. It's in the story in the book and online, but I hate them because they're invasive. They kill other fish too much, and they're bad for the river. And then I had asked him, I'm like, well, what would you do if you caught one? Like, because we'll talk in a minute what you're supposed to do. But he's like, well, if it wasn't a snakehead, I'd release it. If it was, I'd unhook it, throw it on the ground, and I'd start beating it with a stick. So, so Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission says that if you catch a snakehead, you are not supposed to put it back into any kind of a waterway. You're supposed to keep it with you, report it to them. Again, they're not allowed to be transported. It's illegal to move them from one spot to another. But basically, the mantra right now is if you catch a snakehead anywhere in Pennsylvania, you have to report it, but you need to kill the snake or snakehead and not put it back into the waterway, not release it back. It's kind of like the spotted lanternfly. You find it, you kill it type of thing. So Liam was kind of onto that, I guess, as with his stick beating comment there. So I just thought that was cool. So anything else about snakeheads? You guys have questions about? Again, they're not here, but the sounds of it, over time, it's very well likely could be. Now, again, Fishing Creek has some protection a little bit from the river itself, where other waterways don't as much. For example, the Penns Creek again, I mentioned about all the rusties, and there's nothing stopping them from moving up through from the main river into the Penns Creek tributary. But again, I think it's just a matter of time until we see some version of snakehead moving up into our waterways. So we encourage people with snakeheads and with any fish they catch to use what we call Water Recorder. It's an app you can pull up on your phone. It's kind of like Instagram for a phone, or for fishing and for being outdoors. And people can take a picture of a fish. In fact, I shared some just last week of some walleyes that people caught outside of Danville that a guy caught with some growths that were on it that he was concerned about, and shared those out. So again, with snakeheads, above and beyond, the stuff that the Fish and Boat Commission says, we urge people to share that, because over the course of time, we have an interactive map on our website. We potentially could see the advancement of these if people are catching them. So. They are doing, I mean, they have a site on their page on their website devoted to snakeheads. You can learn a lot about snakeheads there, a lot of things you can download and look up and stuff like that. And they have done some programs where they've mentioned about the issue of snakeheads. But beyond that, that's kind of where I feel we fit into the puzzle, and taking that information then and focusing it on our specific watershed, our corner of the state, to try to get this information out. That's one of the reasons we've been really pushing a lot of the stories we do, just to kind of raise awareness of some of this stuff. And again, a lot of people look at it and be like, oh, snakeheads are down south, no big deal to us right now, but it may not be very long until it is an issue. So we want to be ahead of that and let people know if they do find them, what to do, because the earlier they find them, hopefully something can be done. I'm not sure exactly what that would be. Outside of catching them and killing them, I'm not sure what you do to take out snakeheads in an area. It may just be an inevitable course of things, but at least if nothing else, we can raise awareness for people who, again, maybe an angler goes down to Maryland for a tournament, catches some snakehead, and is like, man, this would be really cool up, in the North Branch somewhere. Let's take them up and put them in there, and maybe I'll be catching these someday. But hopefully, in sharing some of this information about it being illegal, the damage that they can do, and just kind of raising that awareness, we're hoping that we can avoid that. So, and we encourage all of you guys again to share it. Again, I'm one person in 11,000 square miles, and we try to do the best we can with our social media and all that, but we definitely rely on people to share out information that is fascinating to them with their friends and coworkers and stuff like that. So, and then to get away from invasives for a little bit, just talk briefly about hellbenders. Oh no, that's not. Sure. I've never eaten a snakehead, but I have heard that they are edible and they taste good, which isn't a good thing for people trying to keep them out. But yeah, no, I've heard that they are. Now that doesn't mean I've heard certain things are edible and tasty. To me, would never be edible or tasty. So, but yeah, so if people catch them, and people, I'm sure some people eat them, and I've heard that they taste good. So, for what it's worth, in the Delaware, and on the very bottom skirts of where, like the Conowingo Dam, kind of below that, snakeheads. Above that, it's kind of the dividing line right now in this Susquehanna, so to speak. But as Sean shared, they were about a dozen or so that made it through at one point. I think they've located all those or most of those, but it only takes a couple to slowly take over an area, populate for long, kind of like the Rusty Crayfish. It can take over pretty quickly. So, and again, it's not all gloom and doom. There's a lot of good things that can come out of at least the awareness of this, and we don't want to scare people into thinking, oh, I can't get in the water because a snakehead's going to chew off my arm or something like that. It's just one of those things that it's good to be aware of and to know kind of the ins and outs and some of the issues surrounding why they can impact our ecosystem. So, okay. And then lastly, to wrap up, and I'm not going too long. If I am, just let me know. I can cut off. Hellbenders, Eastern Hellbender, and again, a lot of you guys know about them already. A lot of people do not. It fascinates me how many people do not know what this is. In fact, we had a booth at Sunbury River Festival this past summer, and I was there the entire weekend, and we had this model, which I just found online right before that, and it's really accurate for the most part. In fact, our resident Hellbender expert, Dr. Peter Patokis, who is an amazing guy who knows a lot about a lot of things beyond Hellbenders, said about their having white tips on their toes, which are not on the models. In fact, he has one like this that he said he was going to paint with nail polish. But, so that's the only small thing that stands out. But they are not a pretty looking creature, obviously, when you look at what they look like. But they are native to our waterway. And I can pass this around. It's much easier for you guys to touch and feel and play with them. So, Eastern Hellbender is our state amphibian. And that was just a recent thing that happened, again, partially because of Peter Patokis and Lycoming College's push to get awareness about them. They're our continent's largest amphibian. In fact, I believe from what I was told that they're one of worldwide. There's only 2 larger, and they're in Asia. Throughout our area, they're definitely the largest amphibian. Mostly a nocturnal. They're very solitary. They stay underneath large boulders or rocks on the bottom of creeks. You're not going to go out and just find them swimming around, you know, dancing and stuff like that. They're under these rocks, and they come out usually at night. They feast primarily on crayfish. They do eat other macros and other goodies they find on the bottom of the creeks, but they are one of the best predators when it comes to crayfish. And when it comes to the bottom creek structure issues, you know, sedimentation and erosion, this is one of the reasons why that can be such a big issue. And it's something I've talked to a lot of people about when they say, oh, you know, banks washing in some, it changes the creek a little bit, no big deal. Well, it does, because these natural rock structures that crayfish depend on, hellbenders, other creatures depend on, become covered up, and then they have nowhere to go. They get picked off easily, and it totally wipes out a certain species in an area. So a huge issue for that. The other thing about the hellbender, and you'll see as you pass around, it has these really weird looking wrinkly sides to it. One of the reasons it has so many weird nicknames, from snot otter to old lasagna sides. It looks like lasagna noodles, so someone nicknamed it old lasagna sides. It breathes like a lot of amphibians through its skin, through those wrinkles. It depends on getting what it needs through that skin. So they are highly sensitive to pollutants and things that get into waterways. And they'll be one of the first creatures that, if there's an issue in the waterway, that you'll see reductions and numbers dropping quickly. And it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. You guys have heard that phenomenon, but you know, miners would take a canary down into the coal mines to monitor oxygen and levels like that. And if the canary died, it was a sign that you need to get out of that mine, and there's an issue. So our hellbenders kind of are in that way, that if they get wiped out of a certain waterway, there's an issue. There's some kind of a pollution, there's a concern, and we should be doing something about it, hopefully before they get wiped out. Dr. Patokas again shared this quote, and he's done a ton of studies. He's, again, fascinating person. 95% of the hellbender population in the Susquehanna watershed. Now that's, you know, Fishing Creek is within that, but again, that's 11,000 of what we have, but also south of us. So every portion of every part of Pennsylvania that feeds into the Susquehanna, 95% of the eastern hellbender population is gone. It's wiped out. You can't find it. Now there are little pockets right now where you can find them, again, according to his research and research of others, in different places up north. You know, there's reports in Lycoming, Loyalsock Creeks, that type of thing. Obviously, they don't want to share details of exactly where those are, because people, curiosity-wise, go and find them and disturb them, and they'll wind up dying. So, but it's definitely a massive thing. Now, why is that? Why are all these hellbenders wiped out over the course of the past 10, 15 years? Well, obviously, there's water quality concerns for most of that that's causing issues. Yeah, they're native to the Susquehanna River. And it's amazing to me because, again, at the River Festival, when I was out at Sunbury, I had the model out, and so many people would walk up and they'd be like waiting for it to move or something. They thought it was a live hellbender. And one guy came up and he's like, yeah, I was down at the Faber Dam, you know, decades ago, working, cleaning it out. And I'd reach underneath to get mud out, and I'd pull out a hellbender, and I'd be like, what is this? And unfortunately, their looks didn't help as far as them getting wiped out as well. People, you know, see them, they think they look nasty or weird or scared by them, and would kill them or whatever. And unfortunately, that impacted them as well. So obviously, cleaning up water quality is the first step to changing that and improving things. And we do have some creeks and waterways that are shown, obviously, as you guys know, there's a lot of areas that water is getting a lot better, and creeks that are getting better. And as that changes over the course of time, the river itself will clean up too. Beyond that, Patokas and his students started a program about 7 years ago, where they would go out, collect hellbender eggs from areas where they knew they were, and they would take them to the Bronx Zoo. Partnership with the Bronx Zoo would raise those hellbenders for the first 2.5 years into being little, about 6-inch long hellbenders. Then Patokas and his team would take them to a lab that he had specifically designed up in New York State, and would raise them for about a year. And in that case, he would feed them specifically what they'd be getting in the waterways in the Susquehanna and acclimated them to that. He has tanks that are designed to look exactly like you would see in the bottom waterways. They also, it was really cool, they've designed cement blocks with piping systems in them that they would place in the bottom of creeks where they would reintroduce them that would mimic the large boulders that no longer could be found in some of these areas, where they could place them. They would go down in the tube into this block and they could stay there, or they could move out, they come back in. So they were using that to replicate some habitat in the area. And so in talking with them, they did a batch about 3 years ago. And then I just happened to talk with him and got an invite to go up and partner with him and go out with him in August to watch and help out with 124 juvenile hellbenders that we put back out in the waterways in the upper parts of the Susquehanna River. And I'm not going to say where because we don't want to, but ultimately the goal is over the course of time that those will matriculate down. And this program, if it goes as well as it looks like it is so far, over the course of time, we can replicate and do some similar things in other parts of the watershed. So we put 124 in. They were, again, maybe 9 inches long. They had specific results every month. They were weighed, they were watched. They had radio transmitter electrodes put into them as well, so they could monitor them. And we put them out in the to the waterways up in that area. And it was a cool experience to be able to see hellbenders, to work with them, and to know that they're out there. And they've gotten good results so far. They've seen from the first batch that we put out, some that are holding on to the area, some that move into other parts of the area and take over. And it's encouraging because it shows that things can be done. Obviously, part of it depends on finances and money that they have in pocket to be able to do this type of program. And the other part is the waterway has to be clean. No sense in putting a hellbender into a waterway that has issues because it's just going to die. So getting waterways cleaned up is first and foremost priority.
Then Pennsylvania's largest and efficient state amphibian. Adults can grow upwards of 30 inches with weights nearing 4.
Yeah, I have this video. I don't know, like I'm not sure if the volume's loud enough I can play it or not. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long, if that's okay. I don't know if I want to hold you guys up too long. This is the video I did from being down there. So you can see the structure of these little tanks that he has, and there is some PVC piping and some rocks, replicate rocks they would see in the bottom of the waterway. And it was fascinating, all these tanks and how he had it set up.
However, their numbers have drastically declined to a point of concern throughout our watershed. On August 28th, the Susquehanna Riverkeeper Association joined Dr. Peter Patokis and his team of volunteers in a special reintroduction program where juvenile hellbenders were released into a tributary in the upper Susquehanna River Basin.
What we're doing is really a collaboration between Lycoming College and Williamsport, College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, and the Bronx Zoo, which is part of the Wildlife Conservation Society in New York City. When we started studying the streams, Susquehanna River watershed, we noticed that hellbenders were either disappearing or were gone. So we partnered together to try and restart historic hellbender population in the upper Susquehanna River watershed. So back in 2014, we collected some eggs and took them to the Bronx Zoo, and they raised them for 2.5 years. Then we brought them up to this new lab facility to rear for another year. And then in August 2018, we released 99 3.5-year-old hellbenders to the wild. And so what we were doing today, in fact, is we have another group of hellbenders, 124 of them, that were raised by the Bronx Zoo again. And today we released them back to the wild as a second set of animals to help head start or restart this population. We plan to actually collect eggs in September and raise them for 3.5 years and release them to the wild. So our goal is to actually release 3 groups of different ages and to have this population begin on its own to produce eggs and young and create a self-sustaining population. But even more than that is we would hope that some of those animals would disperse other areas in the watershed and
There's a cap on top of these structures they built that they can open and slide. The Hellbender slide, they slide down into the rock and then they can close it up to give it protection. But it's open on the front.
It's really a pilot project. It's a unique one of its kind. We can't help to restore the entire Susquehanna River watershed, but at least if we can show that we can do this kind of work here, then maybe we can garner more support and expand the program into more distant parts of the watershed, other tributaries. Cost of rearing them is shouldered by the Wildlife Conservation Society and also by the Wetland Trust, which supports this facility here. But all of the hard work that we do in terms of the physical work is largely volunteerism. We're just getting paid to do this. We're all doing this because we want to see this population restored. The biggest challenges we face largely are weather and water levels in the streams and able to do the physical work. There's also the challenges of getting permission to do this. Everything we do is under permit from the state of New York. And so we have to garner support of the state biologists in order to get the permits through. We've been very successful in doing that through my partnership with James Gibbs at College of Environmental Science and Forestry. We have the expertise to demonstrate, our skills and our success and justify, why we're doing this the way we're doing. Part of doing this requires that we're able to go back to these locations and monitor how the population is actually doing. So we need a site that's really secure, has good habitat, or at least can be enhanced, and then have long-term access for monitoring the population. So our current site is actually owned primarily by the Wetland Trust and a couple of local property owners who are very supportive of what we're doing. Because it's such a unique animal, and we want to maintain that species as part of our biodiversity. And also the populations have been declining dramatically for many, many years now. And it's time that we do something to bring those populations. There are good indicator species of water quality, but they're also so specially unique, being one of only 3 giant salamanders in the world. And I think they have the right to continue to exist.
Those that wish to support Hellbender research and this groundbreaking reintroduction project should contact Dr. Peter Patoukas directly at patoukas@lycoming.edu. Also, the Middle Susquehanna Riverkeeper Association has joined the Center for Biological Diversity, the Waterkeeper Alliance, Waterkeepers Chesapeake, and the Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper Association in a lawsuit against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reconsider an endangered or threatened status of the eastern hellbender. For updates on this process, visit us at middlesusquehannariverkeeper.org.
Played the video and they would have the sales. But yeah, so that was the last part. With the Hellbender, we had groups come up to us. We're part of, again, the Riverkeeper Association is there's a Waterkeeper Alliance that covers worldwide. There's 350 or so chapters of waterkeepers across the world. There's a smaller subset within the Chesapeake Bay area. So they were looking into hellbender numbers, and obviously there are certain areas of the country where hellbenders are doing okay yet. Western part of the state, you can find hellbenders in French Creek and some others out there pretty regularly. Yeah, at the moment, there's no designation for hellbenders nationwide or statewide of endangered or threatened or anything like that. And it's based on these little pockets that are doing okay. Dr. Patoukas was one of the members of experts that were called in the last time they reviewed this for hellbenders, and he said it was unanimous amongst the experts that there should be at least some kind of a threatened tag or something to protect them based off the statistics of hellbender researchers across the country. And after they shared that, they were told, okay, you can leave now. And then shortly after, they were told from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, yeah, there's no need for a designation for them. So we've joined with Waterkeeper Alliance and some others to ask them to reassess that, to talk to their experts again, and to hopefully kind of pushing something forward to at least raise more awareness and hopefully find some protections for the hellbender. So anyway, so that's the hellbender spiel, so to speak. Everything on that I have at the moment. Again, all of this stuff in more detail is on our website, in our book. You can find it on our not just our website, but our social media accounts. And I encourage you, if you guys have any questions at all, We do have an email sign-up sheet if you don't currently get email newsletters from me. I try to make sure that when I put them out, that it's worthwhile, that I'm not just blasting people with emails just because, but there's something new in there and it's hopefully something worthwhile. But definitely, we encourage people to sign up for that. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm still getting better at. My daughter's helped me with that, and YouTube with videos such as this one and some others we put out. The Water Reporter app I mentioned, there's an interactive map on our website. I would encourage you guys to check that out. You go on, it's called Report a Concern, link on the top of our website. If you go there, there's a map that zooms in and shows you the reports we've received. There's a number of them from the Danville area down through into the main stem of different fish that people caught. But we encourage people to take pictures and share on that, not just problem issues, but things that you see that are good too. We want a good representation of what's out there. So, and then anytime anyone wants to call me, my cell phone number, email is there. And then lastly, our shameless plug for the Catawissa Creek. And I'm sure most of you have heard, probably a lot of you have already voted, but if not, voting for River of the Year is Friday, is the deadline at 5 p.m. We were behind the French Creek by quite a bit, a couple thousand votes before they closed down the visibility of that. We have a number of things going. We're getting a lot more traction on that, but we can use every vote possible. So feel free to use the link, share it with your friends, vote as many times as you have email addresses, and hopefully we can make a difference there. So. If you have other emails, you can clear cookies or refresh the history or something like that if you have other email addresses. But if you just have one, then that's one vote's fine. That's great. Then the other way, we just encourage you to share the link with as many friends as possible, and they can provide the extra votes for you as well. So, but yeah, like I said, it's and obviously the Catawissa Creek has its own issues and stuff that I'm sure you guys are mostly aware of. And it would be great to raise some awareness in that area. So.
One more question.
Yeah.
What type of waterway is best for Hellbender?
Clean, clear water. Colder water is good. Obviously they continue to move up when you find them. They're further and further up in tributaries away from the main stem. Again, clean water is key because of the way their skin works and the way they aspirate in potential contaminants. And also that's where they find what they need to eat, and where they find the less chance of sedimentation wiping out rock structure that they need to get underneath. So. Oh yeah, same place you find trout and a lot of other things. It's amazing how they can all go hand in hand. So if we clean up a waterway, how not just one thing, but multiple things will come back into it. So.
The larger area than that. The continents?
The continent, yeah, basically, like as Peter Patokas mentioned there, it's one of three large amphibians, the three largest amphibians, and the other two are in Asia somewhere. So basically, you cut out Asia, you could say it's the largest in the world, but it's it's a very large. They grow up with 2.5 feet long, and they can be. Where'd you see them at?
Pine Creek.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard there's some up in that direction, and that's good. That's great to hear. The more we see, the better. Obviously, if you see them, then that's a good sign for the waterway they're in. So. Yes. Oh, yeah, they are. Yeah. Mud puppies are salamanders, and again, it's in the book on our website with the story with it. Mud puppies get to be about 6 to 9 inches long is their maximum length. So when you think of that versus a 2-foot long hellbender, there's quite a difference in size. Mud puppies have flaps that you can see kind of behind their gills, and there's a couple other distinguishing characteristics that show them off. But it's amazing in a lot of the talks and stuff I've done. Again, River Festival, when I was there, how many people go, oh, look, there's a mud puppy. Well, technically not, but at least it's a good conversation starter. So, I don't know where they stand. That's a good question. It's something we can follow up with and look. I would imagine. I mean, obviously, they transpire through their skin quite as much the same way, and so I would imagine there's a similar trend in mud puppies as well. So. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they would, or if certain areas are better for different species. And mud puppies kind of in one area versus. I know I haven't seen in Penns Creek again, and we spend a lot of time there. I haven't seen either there, but there's a number of issues there too. So Oh, yeah, no, display wise, there's some articles that just kind of showing a smattering of some of the articles we had done through the summer. In fact, I need to update that. There's pictures of our board members. In fact, we just added a new board member that I need to add to the chart, but there's information about our water reporter app. There's also some goodies there that we're looking to sell or get rid of that all help our association. The email newsletter sign up is there. Our CDs for Songs of the Susquehanna are there. And again, I just encourage you guys to check out our website and stay in contact with Relay. If you see something that's weird or have a question or whatever, again, I'm sure you've picked up on, I'm not an expert at all in any of this, but there's a lot of people that know what they're talking about, and we want to try to amplify their voices and hopefully raise awareness during that time. So. Yeah, if you're on Zoom or whatever, you can purchase them on our website. If you go to our website, on the very front, there's a link right to the Catawissa Creek voting right at the top. So before you do anything else, vote for the Catawissa Creek, and then come back, and then there's a link that'll take you to, you can buy them right on our website and pick up copies in our office in Sunbury, or you can actually purchase them when they're on Amazon.com. There's ebooks you can purchase and download. It's a little bit more to purchase it on Amazon due to the extra costs and stuff there, but so you can download an ebook right now and read it in a couple minutes time. Well, at least start reading it in a couple minutes. So, but good. Well, any other questions you guys have?
Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.